We're now joined by Dr. Monique Swift, who is a racial trauma expert and the president of the New Jersey Association of Black Psychologists. Dr. Swift, great to have you with us.
Thank you, Steve. It's great to be here.
Dr. Swift, the term racial trauma, what is it, and put it in context as to why it matters so much?
Okay. So racial trauma, we understand trauma essentially is the lasting impact, adverse impact of on our social, psychological, emotional well-being, physical well-being as well, that results from some sort of event that was experienced as physically or emotionally harmful or threatening in some kind of way. So racial trauma is essentially that, but predicated upon some sort of race-based event, race-based insult. Now, that's kind of I think, a very generic way of putting it. I think what's missing in that frame is the recognition of how devastatingly, racial trauma impacts the person. And particularly when we're talking about racial trauma with Black people, you're talking about an experience that has eviscerated psychological fortitude. You're talking about an experience that has eroded the self-efficacy of Black people. You're talking about an experience that has completely diminished individual and collective efficacy for people and leads to cycles of trauma. So this now becomes an intergenerational pattern of experience.
But doctor, how does it play out in the world of healthcare, specifically racial trauma?
Okay, so in the world of healthcare, you're seeing, I often lean on what was given to us by Dr. Ken Hardy, who describes the wounds of what he calls the wounds of racial oppression and how it appears in people. Essentially, he operationalized into 4 points. The first one is internalized devaluation, and that is what results from persistent messaging of white superiority and Black inferiority.
Doctor, I'm sorry for interrupting. Give us a concrete example of what you mean.
Okay, so for example, simple example, because of the experience of being Black and experiencing the racial trauma, there's a phenomenon that we call imposter phenomenon that is fairly common. It's not exclusive to Black people, but it's fairly common for people who experience racial trauma, such that when you, no matter how accomplished you are, no matter how educated you are, no matter how much status you have, or how affluent you are, there's this kind of voice that speaks to you and says you're not good enough, you don't belong here. They're going to find out that you really don't belong, right? So there's this persistent voice that results from the internalization of racial oppression and racial trauma. That really kind of speaks to that. And we see that, but with very high level people. In fact, Michelle Obama speaks about that in the tour that she does and the experience that she has. As educated, as many doors that she's been behind, she experiences the same thing.
Stay on this in terms of healthcare. So an African-American patient wants to be seen by an African-American physician. First of all, there are not enough. Right? That's a whole separate issue that we've covered and we'll continue to talk about. What is the potential racial trauma that could happen in a situation like that, where there is a patient who happens to be Black with his or her family being treated by a white physician? In and of itself, there's no trauma, but what's the potential for that?
Yeah, so what tends to happen is we live, we function, we operate in white normative culture. And so often what is left out of the therapy room, what people don't bring in, is the fact that people have a racialized experience. Black people, brown people have a racialized experience. And often that experience lends to whatever it is that brings them into the therapy session. When that is omitted, when we don't delve into that because we assume that we all have the same experience, that we're all on a level playing field, when we neglect to delve into directly and openly issues of race and what the experiences have been.
I'm sorry for interrupting, but I need to say this because there are many people watching that are thinking this, disproportionately white, but I'm going to put it out there. You've heard this, you know this, and I need to get to it in the context of what you just said. I don't see color, so therefore I can't be racist.
Yes.
You say.
So, first of all, that is one of the things that I call a conversation stopper. When we're trying to kind of enter into this conversation of race, often people get stuck because of, maybe feelings of guilt, because of, not wanting to be a party to it. It's a dirty word to be a racist, right? We want to distance ourselves from any association with that. So I don't see race, but we all do see race. We do see race. However, I want to.
Even if we don't think we do?
Even if we don't think we do, there's what we call implicit bias, right? Where because we're not consciously thinking, we have trained ourselves, Black, white, and all in between, we've trained ourselves to not think in terms of race because race doesn't exist. That's the polite way to enter into society and to act as though race does not matter or doesn't exist. And so therefore we try to take that off the table, but implicitly, unconsciously, we are recognizing and processing, and we are acting with bias often because that is the food that we drink. That's the water that we swim in. It's filled with racial bias against Black and brown people.
Quick follow-up. Someone says, I'm not racist. You say, even if you buy it, it's not enough because you argue you need to be anti-racist. And it shouldn't be in air quotes. It's what it is. What does that mean? What's the distinction?
So there's an analogy that I often use. There's an analogy that I use. It's using a cup of coffee. We've all had a cup of coffee. We stir that cup of coffee with a spoon. I liken the spoon to a racist, right? As you're stirring that coffee, it creates a current in the cup of coffee. And I liken that current to racism. Racists create the current of racism. If you take a white marshmallow and you drop it in the coffee, what is that marshmallow going to do? It's going to go with that flow. It's going to continue in that current. For all those who say, I'm not racist, that's how I liken those people to that marshmallow floating in the current. You're not doing anything to stop the tides of racism. You're just really going with the flow of the racism, right?
And anti-racist would do what?
Anti-racist will stop that, interrupt and disrupt the current of racism and send this dynamic in a different direction.
Which means to push back with family, friends, and others around us, including ourselves, in which we see it, experience it, sense it, smell it, whatever, and call it out?
All of the above, absolutely. And then begin to move in ways that create a different way of being.
Dr. Monique Swift, a racial trauma expert and so much more. She's the president of the New Jersey Association of Black Psychologists. Dr. Swift, do not let this be the last conversation we have together, okay?
I hope not, Steve. I really look forward to coming back again.
It won't be. Thank you, Doctor. I'm Steve Adubato. More importantly, that's Dr. Swift. We'll be right back.
State of Affairs with Steve Adubato is a production of the Caucus Educational Corporation. Funding has been provided by Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield of New Jersey, Valley Bank, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, the New Jersey Education Association, Summit Health, the Fidelco Group, PSC&G, Community Food Bank of New Jersey, and by the North Ward Center. Promotional support provided by New Jersey Globe and by New Jersey Monthly.
How do you create change? By cultivating hope. And we see that every day. In the eyes of our preschoolers, in the souls of the seniors in our Adult Day program, in the minds of the students at Robert Treat Academy, a national Blue Ribbon School of Excellence, in the passion of children in our Youth Leadership Development Program, in our commitment to connections at the Center for Autism, and in the heart of our community, the North Ward Center, creating opportunities for equity, education, and growth.